50 million maize plants. Take a second to let that number sink in. We aren't talking about the rolling plains of Iowa or the vast industrial belts of Nebraska. We are talking about the Sahel, a place the world's intellectuals and high-priced consultants have spent decades writing off as a barren wasteland. For years, the global narrative has been the same. Africa is starving. Africa is dry. Africa needs a handout. But as the sun rises over the horizon in Burkina Faso this morning, the golden light isn't hitting cracked earth or skeletal cattle. It's hitting a literal sea of green. Bright, stubborn stalks of corn are rising from the dust in a place where agriculture textbooks said they should be dead within a week. Nigeria is cooked if they think the old way of dependency is still the only option. The mask has slipped. And what we are seeing is not just a miracle, it's a defiance. Some call it a project, but let's call it what it really is, an insurrection against the status quo. People are asking, is this just a fluke of nature? Is this some social media stunt designed for clicks? Or is there a hidden hand, a revolutionary will behind these 50 million stalks? Captain Ibrahim Traoré has been speaking about self-reliance since the day he took the stage, and while the old guard in the West sat in their air-conditioned offices laughing at the idea of a desert corn belt, the people of the Sahel were digging. They weren't waiting for a shipment from the UN. They weren't waiting for a charity check that comes with strings attached. They decided that the Sahel should no longer wait for permission to feed itself, but why corn? That's why the very crop that defines American dominance. And more importantly, why is the West so terrified of this green expansion? Because if the Sahel can grow its own food at scale, the chains of foreign aid don't just loosen, they shatter. Stay with us, because what's happening beneath this soil is the first move in a global chess game that will redefine the destiny of an entire continent. For decades, the story of the Sahel was written by people who didn't live there. It was a story of perpetual crisis, a narrative carefully curated to keep the region in a state of controlled poverty. You've seen the images, the fly-infested eyes, the dry riverbeds, the empty bowls. This wasn't just a humanitarian tragedy, it was a business model. For the old guard and the neo-colonial architects, a starving Africa is a profitable Africa. It's an Africa that doesn't ask questions. It's an Africa that trades its gold, its lithium, and its dignity for bags of grain that expire in a month. But the mask has finally slipped. The world is waking up to a harsh truth. Foreign aid was never meant to end hunger. It was meant to manage it. Nigeria is cooked, and much of the continent is waking up to the reality that if you don't own your seeds, you don't own your future. Every time a shipment of emergency food arrives at a West African port, a local farmer loses his job. Every time a foreign NGO patronizes a village with free supplies, the local market collapses. This is the gaslight of the century. They tell you the soil is dead so that you'll buy their chemicals. They tell you the water is gone so that you'll buy their technology. They want you to believe that without the West, the Sahel is nothing but dust. Enter Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't just come to power to change the flag. He came to change the mindset. He understood that the greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. When he looked at the vast stretches of the Sahel, he didn't see a wasteland. He saw a battlefield for food sovereignty. He knew that as long as the Sahel depends on imported corn, wheat, and rice, it will never be truly free. You can have a national anthem and a seat at the UN, but if you can't feed your own children, you are still a colony. This is why the 50 million corn project is causing panic in the halls of Western power. It's not just about agriculture, it's about the death of dependency. Think about the economics. When a nation starts growing its own corn at scale, it stops exporting its hard currency, and it stops being a victim of the fluctuating dollar. It starts building an internal economy where the farmer, the miller, and the baker are all part of a sovereign chain. This is the Traoré way. It's the refusal to play the role of the victim. The experts in Washington and Paris are sweating because they know that once the Sahel proves it can grow corn in the desert, their leverage disappears. The hunger narrative they have spent 60 years building is being dismantled by a man in a beret and a population that has decided they've had enough. The Western media will call this unrealistic. They will call it militarized farming. They will warn of environmental collapse. But notice they never warn about the collapse caused by their own exploitative trade deals. And they are gaslighting a whole continent because they are terrified of the precedent. If Burkina Faso can feed itself, then Mali can feed itself. If Mali can feed itself, then Niger follows. And suddenly, the entire Sahel is no longer a charity case to be exploited for minerals, but a regional powerhouse with its own food security. This corn isn't just organic, it's revolutionary. It's planted with the memory of Thomas Sankara and the grit of a generation that refuses to bow. We are witnessing the first real divorce in modern history, the divorce between Africa and the illusion of Western necessity. The elites are losing their grip because the people have realized that the soil wasn't the problem, the system was. Traoré didn't just give them seeds, he gave them their pride back. And as those stalks grow taller, and the shadow of the old colonial masters grows shorter, this is the end of the handout era. This is the birth of the sovereign breadbasket. Now, let's talk about the biggest lie ever sold to the African continent, the lie of water scarcity. For 50 years, the so-called international experts and high-flying hydrologists from Western institutions have landed in Ouagadougou with their shiny maps and satellite data. Their verdict was always the same. The Sahel is drying up. You need massive dams. You need billion-dollar infrastructure. You need World Bank loans that will take your grandchildren a century to pay off. They made it look like science, but it was a conspiracy of silence. The mask has slipped, and under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, a new generation of Burkina Faso engineers has just exposed the ultimate gaslight. As the reality, the water was always there. It wasn't in the massive dams that evaporate under the Saharan sun. It was in the soil, in the atmosphere, and in the ancient wisdom of the people. While the West was trying to sell us expensive American-style pivot systems that require massive energy and constant maintenance, local innovators were perfecting what we now call the water loop system. This isn't just a technical fix. It's an act of geopolitical sabotage against the hydro monopoly of the old guard. How does it work? It starts with the zip pit, an ancient technique that the colonial mind dismissed as primitive. These are deep, strategic holes dug into the sun-baked earth. But here's the revolutionary twist. The new Sahelian model fills these pits with biochar, a black gold made from market waste and controlled agricultural burns. This biochar acts like a biological sponge. It doesn't just hold water, it captures carbon and creates a nutrient-dense micro-reservoir for every single corn plant. While an Iowa farmer is spraying millions of gallons of water across a flat field, only for most of it to run off or evaporate, the Burkina Faso farmer is performing surgical irrigation. Every drop is accounted for. Every drop stays exactly where it's needed. But the experts are shaking because of reveal number 2, the gravity-fed drip network. Nigeria is cooked if it keeps following the Western model of high-energy agriculture. The Sahel engineers didn't wait for a power grid that doesn't exist. Yes, they built a system of thin, inexpensive black tubes that use the natural contours of the land. It's a low-tech, high-intelligence solution that reduces water waste by a staggering 80%. Imagine that. In a region the world called bone dry, they are growing water-heavy maize with a fraction of the liquid used in the United States. The Western consultants hate this. Why? Because you can't put a patent on a zip pit. You can't charge interest on a gravity-fed tube. You can't control a nation that has mastered its own hydrology using local materials. This is why they kept us in the dark. Keeping Africa thirsty was the best way to keep Africa weak. If you control the water, you control the food. If you control the food, you control the soul. Traoré realized that true independence doesn't come from a ballot box. That it comes from a water pump that doesn't require a foreign technician to fix. Then came the data point that sent shockwaves through the agricultural universities in Kansas and Nebraska. Soil tests in these revolutionary corn plots showed a 32% increase in organic matter in less than a year. For context, Western industrial farms spend decades and billions on synthetic fertilizers, trying to move that needle by even 5%. The Sahel didn't use chemicals. They used the loop. They captured the morning dew. They recycled domestic runoff, and they allowed the maize roots to aerate the soil in a way that millet never could. This is the water loop conspiracy. The conspiracy is that it was always this simple, but the old guard didn't want us to know. They wanted the Sahel to stay in the 1970s, begging for tanker trucks and plastic bottles. Yes, they wanted to maintain the image of the parched continent to justify their endless development projects that develop nothing but their own bank accounts. But the secret is out. These 50 million maize plants are drinking water that the experts said didn't exist. What we are seeing is the birth of sovereign engineering. It's a middle finger to the predatory loan systems that use water crisis as a pretext for land grabs. In the labs of Ouagadougou and the fields of Kaya, the message is clear. We don't need your dams, and we certainly don't need your permission. The Sahel is no longer waiting for the rain. It is managing the rain it already has. And as the aquifers stabilize and the sensors turn from red to green, the global power balance is shifting. When a nation solves its water problem without a foreign loan, and it has truly become ungovernable by outside forces. This isn't just about growing corn, it's about reclaiming the right to exist on our own terms. The water loop is the bridge between the ancient past and a sovereign future. And as those 50 million stalks grow taller, they aren't just sucking up water, they are sucking the life out of the neo-colonial narrative. The experts can keep their maps. The Sahel will keep its harvest. You have to understand that in the Sahel, a leader isn't just someone who signs decrees. A leader is a mirror. For 60 years, that mirror was cracked, reflecting only the interests of Paris, the IMF, and a corrupt local elite who preferred French champagne over Burkina Faso grain. But when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the scene, the mask didn't just slip, it was ripped off. He didn't come with the polished, hollow rhetoric of a career politician. He came in camouflage, wearing a beret that reminded every person from Dakar to Djibouti of one name, Thomas Sankara. But Traoré isn't just a ghost of the past. He is the architect of a very real, very green future. The 50 million corn project didn't start in a laboratory. It started in the spirit of a man who refused to beg. While the old guard leaders of the region were busy flying to Europe for investment summits that never invested a dime in the people, Traoré was in the mud. He understood a fundamental truth that Nigeria is cooked if its leaders don't realize. You cannot have national security without food security. A soldier with an empty stomach cannot defend a border, and a nation that relies on its former colonizer for breakfast is a nation that is still in chains. Yet Traoré's masterstroke wasn't just approving a budget, it was the mobilization of the soul. He transformed the Burkina Faso military from a purely defensive force into a production powerhouse. Under his National Service for Development, the army didn't just carry rifles, they carried shovels. They didn't just man checkpoints, they manned irrigation hubs. This wasn't forced labor, the Western media's favorite buzzword for African success. This was a cultural alignment. When the people saw their soldiers planting seeds alongside them, something shifted. The wall between the state and the citizen collapsed. For the first time in generations, the government wasn't a predator, it was a partner. And this is the Maïs Traoré factor. It's the psychological warfare against the victim mentality. The experts told the people of Burkina Faso that they were poor. Traoré told them they were temporarily dispossessed. There is a massive difference. One leads to despair, the other leads to a revolution. He weaponized the pride of the Sahelian people. He reminded them that their ancestors built empires in this very dust long before a single colonial map was drawn. He turned the act of planting a corn seed into an act of resistance. In the fields of Kaya and Dori, every row of corn is a bullet fired at the heart of neo-colonialism. Think about the storytelling here. Imagine a young man in Ouagadougou. A year ago, he was looking at the Mediterranean, thinking about a dangerous boat journey to Europe because he believed his land was a curse. Today, that same young man is a soil guardian in a local cooperative. He's part of the 50 million. He isn't looking for a way out. He's looking for a way in. He sees Traoré on the news, not in a three-piece suit in a luxury hotel, but in the dust, checking the moisture of the Zai pits. That visual creates a bond that no Western aid package can ever buy. The old guard hates this. They hate it because you can't gaslight a man who sees results with his own eyes. You can't tell a mother that her country is failing when her children are eating corn grown 5 miles from her home. Traoré's influence has crossed borders without a single shot being fired. In Mali, in Niger, and even in the struggling corridors of Nigeria, people are looking at the 50 million corn stalks and asking, why can't we do that? That's why are our leaders still waiting for the World Bank? Traoré has proven that leadership in Africa doesn't mean being a good student of Western democracy. It means being a good steward of African resources. He didn't ask for permission to turn the desert green. He didn't wait for a feasibility study from a firm in London. He simply empowered the people to believe in their own hands again. He realized that the greatest resource in the Sahel isn't gold or manganese. It's the untapped energy of a youth population that has finally found something worth building. As these 50 million stalks reach for the sun, they are a living monument to a man who understood that you don't fight neocolonialism with speeches alone. You fight it with harvest. You fight it by proving that the experts were wrong and the peasants were right. And Ibrahim Traoré didn't just plant corn, he planted the idea that Africa bows to no one. And once that idea takes root, no drought, no sanction, and no foreign conspiracy can ever tear it out. The Sahel is no longer a graveyard of dreams. It is the front line of the great African awakening. If you think this is just about farmers and tractors, you're missing the entire board. This is a grand masterclass in geopolitical chess. And Ibrahim Traoré just made a move that has the old guard in a panic. To understand why 50 million stalks of corn are a threat to the global elite, you have to understand the secret mechanism of the agro-dollar. For decades, the global financial system has operated on a simple, brutal principle. Africa produces the raw materials, gold, uranium, cocoa, and in exchange, it buys back finished products and basic food in US dollars. This isn't a trade, it's a vacuum. Every time a West African nation imports a ton of corn or wheat from the American Midwest or the European Union, it has to first find the dollars to pay for it. Nigeria is cooked if it continues to let its foreign reserves bleed out just to put bread on the table. When you depend on the global market for your calories, you are effectively a slave to the Federal Reserve. If the dollar gets stronger, your bread gets more expensive. If the Western powers decide to sanction you, your people starve. Food is the ultimate leash. But what happens when the Sahel, the region they told us was a basket case, suddenly becomes a bread basket? The leash snaps. The 50 million corn project is a direct act of economic sabotage against the dollar dependency trap. By growing its own corn at scale, Burkina Faso is effectively de-dollarizing its stomach. Every million tons of corn produced in the Sahel is a million tons that don't need to be bought in USD. This is money that stays in the local economy. This is money that builds schools, paves roads, and funds the very revolution that the West is trying to suppress. The masters of the old guard aren't worried about the corn, they are worried about the currency. They are terrified that the Sahel is showing the rest of the global South a blueprint for financial exit. Look at the players on the other side of the board. The American Corn Belt is a multi-billion-dollar machine that relies on global exports to maintain its dominance. For years, West Africa has been a dumping ground for subsidized Western crops. These food aid programs and cheap imports were never about kindness. They were about market share. They were designed to kill local competition and ensure that African farmers could never compete. But Traoré has flipped the script. He isn't playing by the rules of free trade, which was never free for Africa. He is practicing sovereign protectionism. He is using the military to secure the land and the youth to till it, creating a domestic supply chain that is immune to Western market manipulation. This moves the pieces toward reveal number 3, the Sahel Alliance's economic fortress. This corn project isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader coordination between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Yet they are creating a regional food corridor that bypasses the traditional colonial ports. If Burkina Faso has a surplus of corn, it doesn't go to the global market to be sold for peanuts. It goes to Mali to feed their livestock. It goes to Niger to stabilize their food prices. They are building a circular African economy that doesn't require a green slip of paper printed in Washington to function. The old guard media will try to gaslight you. They will say that the Sahel can't compete with the efficiency of Western industrial farms. But efficiency is a lie when one side is subsidized by billions in taxpayer money and the other is strangled by debt. Traoré's efficiency is different. It's the efficiency of survival. Yet it's the efficiency of a people who have realized that dignity is more valuable than a low price at a supermarket owned by a multinational corporation. The mask has slipped. We are seeing the birth of a new commodity war. In the past, wars were fought over oil and gold. Today, the most radical thing an African nation can do is grow its own food. When Traoré stands in those cornfields, he isn't just looking at a harvest, he's looking at the end of the IMF's leverage. You can't threaten a nation with economic isolation if they have their own water, their own seeds, and their own grain. The agro-dollar system only works if Africa remains hungry. This is why the Western think tanks are suddenly writing papers about the instability of the Sahel's agricultural model. They want to scare away investors. Should they want to create a narrative of failure before the first ear of corn is even husks? They are gaslighting the world because they know that if the Sahel succeeds, the hunger narrative dies forever. And once the hunger narrative dies, the rescue narrative follows. The West loses its moral high ground to intervene. Ibrahim Traoré is playing the long game. He knows that the real global chess isn't played in the UN Security Council. It's played in the dirt. He is turning the Sahel into a fortress of food. And as the 50 million stalks grow, the value of the African soul rises, while the power of the agro-dollar begins to fade. The world is watching a revolution that is being televised not in slogans, but in bushels. Africa isn't just rising, it's feeding itself. And that is the most dangerous thing a continent can do. Is growing the corn is only half the battle. If the Sahel grows 50 million stalks only to sell the raw grain back to Western corporations for pennies, they are still playing the old guard's game. This is the trap that has kept Africa poor for centuries, exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. Nigeria is cooked if it keeps exporting crude oil and importing refined gasoline, and the same logic applies to the dirt. But the mask has slipped. Ibrahim Traoré isn't just building farms. He is building an industrial ecosystem. He understands that true sovereignty isn't found in the field. It's found in the factory. Welcome to the processing revolution. Across the Sahel corridor, a new kind of hero is emerging. Not just the farmer, but the engineer, the mechanic, and the cooperative leader. And these are the people turning simple yellow cobs into a multi-layered economy. In the past, if a Burkina Faso village had a surplus, it would rot because they lacked storage and processing power. Today, the desert is being dotted with processing circles. These aren't the billion-dollar, foreign-owned industrial complexes that the World Bank loves to finance. Complexes that break down the moment a German technician isn't available to fix them. No, these are sovereign mills. Take the story of young innovators like Sue, a local mechanic who represents the new African spirit. While the experts were busy writing white papers on logistical challenges, Seyu was in his workshop welding scrap metal and old motorcycle parts into solar-powered grain dryers. He didn't need a grant from Paris. He needed a leader who told him he was capable. And under the Traoré administration, these grassroots inventions are being scaled at lightning speed. We are talking about compact mobile mini-mills that can be mounted on the back of a tricycle and move from village to village. This is decentralized power, both literally and figuratively. The results are shattering the neo-colonial market. Reveal number 5 is the one that really hurts the Western exporters. Within just a few growing cycles, the Sahel's internal processing capacity has surged by over 300%. Women's cooperatives, once the forgotten backbone of the rural economy, are now producing fortified maize flour, high-protein livestock feed, and even industrial starch. This is value addition in its purest form. When a grandmother like Awa in a remote village can process her own corn into high-quality flour, she isn't just feeding her family, she is cutting the throat of the import industry. She is the reason why European grain ships are finding fewer and fewer buyers in West African ports. The old guard is gaslighting the world, claiming that African-made products can't meet international standards. But who set those standards? The very people who want to sell you their own products. Traoré has ignored the international noise and focused on the national standard. If the flour is clean, nutritious, and grown by our people, it is the highest standard in the world. This psychological shift has unleashed a wave of everyday heroes. Young entrepreneurs are creating maize-based livestock feed that costs 50% less than the imported junk, effectively lowering the price of meat and milk for the entire nation. This is the bullied, the multiplier effect. One corn seed becomes a plant. That plant becomes grain. That grain becomes flour, feed, and fuel. And most importantly, that process creates jobs that stay in the Sahel. It stops the brain drain. It stops the desperate migration of youth who used to think their only future was in a boat crossing the sea. Now, their future is in a solar-powered mill in their own backyard. They are realizing that the American dream of the Midwest, the big barns, the industrial independence, the rural pride, isn't an American patent. It's a human right. The Western media won't show you this. They want to keep the camera focused on the instability or the military juntas. They don't want you to see the cooperatives of women laughing as they operate their own machinery. They don't want you to see the young engineers in Ouagadougou designing circuit boards for irrigation sensors. Because if the world sees that the Sahel is winning the processing war, the myth of African incapacity dies forever. Ibrahim Traoré's message is clear. We will not be a continent of raw materials anymore. We will not be the world's quarry or its plantation. From the 50 million stalks of corn to the thousands of local mills, the Sahel is proving that technology isn't something you buy from a foreign master. It's something you build with your own hands. The processing revolution is the final nail in the coffin of the colonial economy. The Sahel isn't just growing food, it's growing an industrial future where every cob of corn is a brick in the wall of African independence. As the final weeks of the planting cycle pass, and something miraculous is happening that no satellite in Washington or Paris expected to see. It's not just about the grain in the silos or the flour in the markets. It's about the very breath of the desert itself. Latest environmental assessments have revealed a staggering green cooling effect. In the areas where these 50 million corn stalks stand, the local temperature has dropped by as much as 1.7 degrees Celsius. Think about that. While the rest of the world is debating climate change in luxury hotels, the people of the Sahel are literally cooling the planet with their own hands. The soil, once a fine powder that blew away with the wind, is now gaining structure, holding life, and inviting the birds and the wildlife back to a land that was once declared dead. This is the ultimate proof that the experts were wrong. Now, the Sahel isn't a problem to be solved by foreign intervention. It is a laboratory of resilience for the entire world. If you can grow corn in the Sahara, if you can build a processing economy in a conflict zone, and if you can unite a nation around the spirit of self-reliance, then there are no more excuses for the rest of the global South. The mask has slipped, and what we see behind it is the face of a new Africa, one that doesn't look to the north for its North Star. Nigeria is cooked if it doesn't pay attention to this blueprint. The era of the old guard and their begging bowls is over. Ibrahim Traoré has shown that the greatest fertilizer for any land is the dignity of its people. This movement isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It's a continental contagion. From the streets of Bamako to the markets of Niamey. Yet the message is echoing. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We don't need your aid. We don't need your advice. And we certainly don't need your permission to thrive. The world is watching a reordering of reality. The Sahel, long labeled as the belt of poverty, is transforming into the belt of power. And as the golden cobs dry under the sovereign sun, they stand as silent witnesses to a revolution that cannot be reversed. This is the death of the victim and the birth of the titan. Now, it's your turn to join the movement. If you believe that Africa's soil is a blessing and not a curse, if you stand with the spirit of Traoré and the 50 million who refuse to bow, then we have a ritual here. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type Africa Rise or amen. Let the world know that the hunger narrative is dead. And let them see that we are awake, we are fed, and we are free. Don't just watch history. Be part of the generation that rewrote it. Subscribe to join the front lines of the great African awakening, because the desert is turning green, the people are standing tall, and Africa bows to no one.